And if that doesn't inspire you, then whatever drugs you're doing, you should stop.
Find better ones.
Yeah, find better ones. There you go.
Welcome to How Did We Get Here, the podcast where each week our two talking heads, being myself, Jess Bost,
and Mark Newfield,
bring on guests to learn more about their past 5 jobs before landing where they are today.
Because, as you know, life is super simple, straightforward, and never makes people ask, wait, you did what?
Join us for an honest convo on career exploration, overcoming setbacks, considering when to pivot, and offering encouragement on how to find value in your career and life choices.
And with that, let's ask the question.
Holy crap,
how did I get here?
Together.
And we are back. Today, we're discussing our thought-provoking conversation, and it really was thought-provoking, and I've been accused of using those words too often, with Perth. And Jess, what's the right pronunciation of her last name?
Tolle.
Tolle, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Perth is a truly insightful financial professional. You'll love this conversation. I would encourage you to listen to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
There's a nugget in like every statement that she makes, who has truly forged her own path in the investment world.
Yeah, no, all of that is true. She is a pioneer in so many ways in this space. And this was such a powerful conversation that at many points centered around her humility, actually, and her work ethic as it related to her path to get to where she was. And then also her generous inclusion of others and their ideas and how those added to and influenced her conviction along the way. She's so powerful. It's very cool to see how her power is kind of made up of this humility, this conviction, this ethic, this willingness to bring in others' ideas. It's just, she's a very unique and amazing person.
So yeah, I did start off in the industry as a financial advisor. Fidelity in the phone site in the Dallas area. So the number you call 1-800-FIDELITY, you would have gotten me. And that's where I started in the industry. I basically learned everything from there. That's where I got my 7, my 65. Went from the phone number, 800-FIDELITY to eventually being an advisor in branches. And I was in the Los Angeles market and the Houston market. I was at Fidelity for about 10 years total, including 2 years off for maternity, like when I had a baby. So I did have clients there at Fidelity. Like I had a Russian client in Houston who was like, I don't want to invest in Russia because it's like funding terrorism. And I felt the same way about China. And when I was at Fidelity, I was married to my ex-husband who was studying for his CFA. And he, did the whole indexing section, and eventually, conversations turned into kind of this idea, which pummeled me until I eventually had to do it.
And I would add to that, a really collaborative person. I mean, it's just super impressive. Now, I wish that I could listen and engage with other people the way she does.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a function of being male, right? But we can have that conversation another day. Something really cool about this conversation is, it was right after we talked to Shayna Sissel, who also talked about investing in things that resonate with your beliefs. The fund was, all of her beliefs, and you'll see that.
Mm-hmm.
And, the traditional mindset for years and years and years has been, separate your personal values from your financial decisions. You've got this quantitative approach. Yep. It makes decisions. Now I would go back and say Peter Lynch didn't do that at all, right? He made choices and then said, do the financials match up with what I believe, which is in a lot of ways what Perth has done, but in a very different way. But we make these quantitative decisions. We're going to optimize risk and return. You got Sharp factor, you got alpha, you got beta, you got all these fun things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not what Perth did.
Yeah.
And what the research has shown over and over again is that staying invested is so much more important than making the exact right investment decision. And that's where your ability to achieve outsized returns is. So when you invest in something you care about, and this is very similar to what Shayna was saying about her approach, and you're willing to stick with it, especially during down markets, because it's aligned with your values, right? That becomes really important because you stay invested. And I have a long held belief that a lot of the investment professionals I know will dump on me about it. But my general approach, and I think Shayna and Perth at least, and maybe this is my own confirmation bias, but my general approach is any strategy will work as long as you stick with it.
Yeah.
And you understand its behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And Perth, that's how she got going.
Yeah. It was very like, it would not let me go. Like from the beginning, like it was just an idea that I was like, needs to exist. And, at the time there was nothing in the emerging market space that wasn't, hugely concentrated to autocracies.
Right. Because we have clients ask us
yeah,
that all the time. I don't want to be in China. I don't want to be in Russia. I mean, yes.
Yeah. And now people do. But back then, like my Russian client was quite different. He was probably the only one that I can think of who ever said that to me.
Right.
And, when I started in the industry, it was 2004 and China was the big thing. So everybody wanted China at the time and they had no idea. I had just come back from Hong Kong and, I was like, you guys have no idea what's actually going on over there. And, that these companies have 3 sets of books, one for you, one for their regulators, one for, these other people like, the accountants. And so it's like, you don't actually know what you're investing in.
Right.
But nobody cared, about that. And even when we started this fund in 2019, still, I felt like, one of very few people actually saying this stuff and very much the contrarian. It felt very original at that time.
Perth emphasized in our conversation an idea that navigating the financial landscape doesn't have to come with those typical pressures to conform to what the path in front of you should look like in financial services. And, that came about in conversations about her being a mom and in transitioning from a good job to maybe one that was a little more financially insecure in the beginning. And her approach is really about finding your own way and figuring out what it is that you can give to the world inside the space that you're in, which for her was financial services, and embracing that unique journey that you will take through your career path. And for her, she talked a lot about just feeling called, like just this knowing that this was something that she had to do. And so that I want to encourage people that if you are in this space and you are feeling that pull and that tug to do something that doesn't already exist, but you know that it needs to exist in this world, really take a page out of Perth's book and be inspired and encouraged that is certainly a way that you can navigate your career here in finances.
Now it's like mainstream, like nobody wants to invest in China.
Right.
Even after this policy bazooka, I did have one client who did have some China FOMO and I had to explain, this is not the strategy if you want that. And he was like clarifying, no, that's not what we want. I'm just, they did have a little bit of a FOMO, but, and I think that's very natural. And so, but I think in the long run, our investors are here for 2 reasons. 1, they don't want to fund autocracies with their investments. And 2, they believe that freer markets will outperform. And because they have stronger institutions, stronger rule of law, better protections for individuals, for investors, for IP, and so forth. And these are the foundations that lay the groundwork for innovation and the next big growth stories. And as index investors, you just want to get those, big growth stories, right? You're going to have some holdings that literally go to zero. And then you're going to have these, Apple, Alphabet, NVIDIA's. And that's what you want to capture. And so we believe that the best place to capture those are in these freer markets. So that's why kind of we do what we do. But yeah, going back to being an advisor, that was a very difficult job to leave. I loved it. I loved my team. I loved my clients. Like, for some reason, when I was at Fidelity, I always had like the best teams and managers, which is like very rare experience at 10 years at a very corporate place to have that.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was just very, very ideal and very cushy job. And so it was very difficult to leave.
It certainly is. And for those of you out there listening and or watching, you're going to see another example of this coming up with a gentleman named Dave Ross, who also, it's interesting how some of these things have paired up.
Yeah.
I would argue that Shano has a calling. Perth clearly feels it and knows it. Dave expressed the same thing. And I mean, again, this is my confirmation of bias of work. I don't know that I had that feeling in 2000, when I left the consulting business and got into this business, but I knew that what I was doing wasn't the right thing.
Yeah.
Even though I was very highly compensated and, I'd been professionally successful. So that calling was just very clearly expressed.
Yeah.
And then another thing that was super interesting was her perspective on uncertainty. She talked about embracing uncertainty, and that opens up opportunities by just willing to dive into it.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think we've both observed over a journey that we've taken with now, I think 13 or 14 folks, is the amount of luck that happens. Well, I would argue that luck is a function of uncertainty and embracing uncertainty, because if you're willing to step into it and try different things, eventually you run into luck or it runs into you. And it's just a valuable reminder, sometimes, what is it? I think Woody Allen, 90% of life is just showing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not that Woody Allen is somebody I would consider to be a reputable or attractive figure these days, but it was an insightful statement.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that quote up, because it was living somewhere in the back of my mind. And I definitely agree and enjoyed Perth's perspective on, like, to your point, it's about luck. Part of luck is just showing up. Part of building your business and building your career is just showing up, even when you don't feel like it.
Oh, tell me there aren't days when you have no desire to do some prospecting work.
Yeah.
Like, that's like every day.
Every day. Every day.
For most of the good advisors I know, they hate the sales aspect of this business.
Yeah.
But I mean, the reality is you run your own business. You have to have revenue.
Yeah.
You don't have to like how you get it.
But you do. In that space, you do have to keep showing up.
Yeah, you got to keep showing up.
But I remember looking at my account statement one day in my kitchen. I had a young child at the time, and I was looking at it, and there was a milestone number. And I guess as like financial people, we like round numbers. And I was like, I have enough money, like I don't need more. So I could leave this job and take some risk. So that was kind of a turning point. And it wasn't just that, looking at that number, it was also at the time, I had just come to the Houston market from the LA market a year prior. And I was dying because I had a young child. I was trying to juggle, going back to the office and having a young child. Like, there were times when she would be sick and I would be home for like a week. And then I was like, I'm going to get fired. Like, that never entered the mind of my employer, but it was basically like very stressful for me.
Stressful. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I wanted to stay at home as well. So that was the reason, like part of the reason why I left Fidelity, is yes, I in the back of my mind, I wanted to start this company and this fund, but also it was becoming like, I felt like it was just the right thing for me, like personally as well. And now having a teenager is also a challenge, and everything that comes with that. And then everybody has their own special issues. And so there's always going to be issues. That's another thing I'm learning recently is, especially getting older, like you're never bringing 100% every day. Like sometimes 40% is enough. Sometimes showing up is enough. And that's sometimes all you're called to do. So like today, Jess is here. So, and she hasn't had power for 5 days, so that's sometimes that's enough, just showing up. And, I find that especially like right now, we've had a week of underperformance due to the China pop, due to the China bazooka, right? And I have a client that called me this morning, asking, hey, what happened? Like, what do I do? And so, and I didn't actually, before I took the call, know what I was going to say. And so sometimes you just have to show up and in the moment, address whatever the need is, right? So yeah, you don't always have to be prepared 100%. You don't always have to be like bring 100% energy. You just have to show up sometimes, and that's going to have to be enough. And most people don't show up, so you will already be have an edge if you just show up.
Well, another thing is I loved how she framed the idea that we shouldn't wait for the perfect moment to act. So kind of still in that vein of showing up. It's not just there's not a good time to show up. There's not a good feeling to show up. It's just keep taking that step forward, take those small, deliberate steps forward, and recognize that in the big scheme of things, that's going to grow into the outcome that you're looking for. And I like that because it's also compassionate, not just compassionate toward others, but especially compassionate toward yourself. Because if you're not bringing that 100% every day, if you're not taking those huge steps and strides towards your goals every day, it's that compassion towards yourself to say, I'm doing enough, it is really important, I think, from a psychological health standpoint. And the flip side of that is it's unrealistic to expect that we can always show up and give 100% and do our best every single day. That's just not possible. And so if you can give yourself the kudos for just showing up with what you have, be good with yourself for doing that psychological benefit of being with yourself and being good with yourself along the way is going to continue to help you move forward.
Coming out of Fidelity, I'm going to quote Abigail Johnson, who is now the president, but I'm not endorsing anything, but basically she does very few TV interviews, but once she did one, and in that interview she said asset management is actually a great career for women because you can do it at any time of day. And that has helped me. Although my discipline, I'm a night person naturally, my discipline to actually sleep has not been helped. But
that's the problem with it being something you can do any time of day, because then you do it any time of day.
Yeah. And so I appreciate that part of the business. Of course, I still have to be here, during the day for actual meetings and, talking with advisors and so forth. So that part I feel like it was better with my own thing than working for a firm. And you do have a lot more flexibility as an entrepreneur than you do working for a firm. I think being an ETF sponsor is different too than, say, a financial advisor, because it's more flexible, I guess, with your time, because you're not working like during hours that everybody expects you to be necessarily. So that helps. The fact that you can't turn it off at any point doesn't really help. So there's pros and there's cons, and so I try to because I have one daughter and she's 13 now, and so because it's a important age, even though not the most pleasant age, I'm fortunate to be at a point where I can say I want to prioritize her, so I can literally revolve my schedule around her. And I'm also fortunate to have really great childcare. And this is something I didn't have when I left Fidelity. Like when I was at Fidelity, I didn't have this. Basically, I moved to this neighborhood about 3 years ago. And in this neighborhood are these two girls who are like my neighbors, who are 18 years old now. And they are my babysitters and sometimes assistants. So if you've gotten a hoodie from me, probably it was sent by one of these girls. And so having them and just being able to travel and not worry, because these are great girls, just great girls. I love to have my daughter around. That has helped immensely. So I think that it's good. It's important to have systems in place. Also, we have ETF Architect, who are great partners, who have provided that operations side. And let's say I'm out of commission for whatever reason, they can pick up the slack on my behalf. And so I think that has been tremendous for this. And I think I couldn't have done it without them. I couldn't have done it without the girls, so I think all of those things work together. But, going back to the being called to do this, like, I feel like if we're called to something, that we will be equipped to do it. And that's been my experience. And so I think that if you truly know that you're being called to do something, and I had to have a lot of confirmation that that's what was happening, a lot more than just that bank account number. But, I think if you know that for sure, then pretty much nothing's going to stop you anyway. And I didn't have this system in place the whole time, right? I had it in place since the beginning of the fund, ETF Architect. I had the, Girls in the Neighborhood since 3 years ago. I've been doing this for 10 years now. So yeah, you don't always, even if we don't have the systems in place, just try to show up and hope that gets multiplied, I guess, because sometimes that's the only way it's going to happen. So
that is so true. I mean, you'll hear her talk about, sometimes 40% is all you got, and you just show up with that. And where that displayed itself and has displayed itself in everything she's done is just her tenacity. I mean, I hope we have the clip in. I haven't gotten through this whole thing yet, but I hope we have the clip in about her being on the beach there and thinking her whole thing is blown up and it's done. And it was actually at that moment that it got lifted off the ground.
Yes.
Right. At her point of what she thought was her greatest and total failure.
Yep.
But the fact is, she had that tenacity. This is very much a Stoic statement, and I don't have the exact Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus quote, but it's something on the order of, you only fail when you quit. And she just never quit. And she got to, hey, if it works out, great. If not, I'll learn and I'll move forward and do something. And it was one foot in front of the other. Mm-hmm. The universe is going to be here. Because this is my calling, I am therefore equipped to be able to execute on it.
Yes.
That was a really profound statement. But realistically, that kind of personal accountability and the willingness to deal with the success and the setbacks is where it's all at. And if that doesn't inspire you, then whatever drugs you're doing, you should stop.
Find better ones.
Find better ones. There you go. But it's, we're not all comfortable with that, right? Yeah. With that level of faith. And I'm not about religious faith. I'm talking about faith in yourself.
Yeah.
That makes some people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of risk in that. It's back to the uncertainty because you don't know that you can succeed. Mm-hmm. But I do know this. If you don't try, you have failed.
This reminds me, I was having a conversation last night with my daughter on the way home from volleyball. The night before, she had a volleyball game, and on the way to the game, she was telling me about how much better she's getting at her hits. So a hit is where you take one hand and the ball's coming at you, and usually this is front row. And you take that one hand and you have the other hand that's kind of guiding you, and you bring that hand forward and you hit the ball, and it gives the ball a lot more velocity and power and speed going back over the net.
Big arc and swing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so she's been practicing this, and so she was telling me yesterday on the way to a game that she was really excited because she's getting better at that. And in the middle of the game, I could see it. I could see her whole body set up for it. The ball was coming at her. She put that hand out in front of her. She pulled that hand back, and she whiffed the ball.
Oh my goodness.
So hard that the ball missed her hand and hit her in the head.
She was trying to kill it. Yeah.
She completely
That's a
missed
legal
it.
hit, by the way.
Yeah, it is a legal hit. You can hit it. I found this out. You can only serve with your hand, but the rest of the game, you can hit the ball with
Yeah.
any other body part.
As long as you don't put your palms on that ball, you're okay.
Yeah. So, she was mortified, and this was yesterday in the
Yeah.
game. She was mortified. Her whole face was beet red. She recovered fine, kept playing. And I chose not to talk to her about it yesterday, but on the way home, or chose not to talk to her about it at the time. On the way home yesterday from our game, we were in the car talking, and I said, "Hey, I noticed that you didn't try to hit the ball during today's game." She did her little two-handed kind of touch passes, and she kind of buried her head. And I said, "You're probably not going to do that for a minute, right?" And she goes, "No, that was so embarrassing." I said, "I get it. I could see it. I felt it for you too." I said, "But just let me encourage you this." And this is where it comes back to what you're talking about, Perth. I said, number one, failure is not a bad thing. Missing that ball is not a bad thing. The other thing that's really important for you to know is that your body learned something whenever you missed that ball.
Mm-hmm.
Something that it never knew before. And I just want to encourage you that the next time you try to hit the ball, your body knows something that it didn't know before. And now you're going to be better at it. And so there really are moments in life where you have to take those failures, take those L's, because they teach you more than the W's do. They teach you more. Sure. Missing that ball, I promise you, I told her, I said, missing that ball taught you more than hitting it ever will. And her little body kind of perk up a little bit. And, it really touched me, maybe even more than it affected her, just to kind of take that whole lesson of the losses, the failures. They're important. They don't just teach us character. They teach us more about the thing that we're trying to do that we didn't know and wouldn't have known if we had not lost.
That is a very good statement. Yes.
So I just, I appreciated it, and I enjoyed kind of the combination of all we've been talking about. Life does that to you, right?
It does.
And how that related back to Perth. And the thing about Perth is that she doesn't just make decisions; she actively shapes her career. So there are these moments where she shows up, but she also has this idea and this tenacity about it. And she's recognizing and learning from these failures. And so it's a combination of both for her. It's not just kind of blindly walking forward. She's definitely, being thoughtful and having that kind of active piece of it as well, along with just the resilience that comes from having to do both, right? I'm going to gather my wins. I'm going to gather my losses. There's people around that, I can lean into and learn from. They can learn from, all of this. She just gathers it all in and uses it to propel her forward. And, I think other people can probably, if they don't relate to it, they can at least learn from Perth in their own ways about how to move their own careers forward.
Basically, I started this index in 2014, the first iteration of it. And then 2015 and 16, I kind of was getting a lot of feedback from potential clients that I had been speaking with that, they wanted something more with the freedom factor isolated, versus before I had other factors in there, like valuations, yield, and stuff like that, trying to, juice it up. But people were telling me, hey, the main innovation here is freedom, right? If we wanted an EM value fund, we could already get that elsewhere. So can you just isolate this factor? So that's what I did. And so I basically started the index anew in 2017, taking out everything except the freedom factor. On the security level, we do exclude state-owned enterprises, but that's part of the economic freedom. So once that was done in 2017, I started trying to shop it around to issuers, because the initial idea was, hey, I just created an index, and I want an issuer to basically license the index from me and launch the product. I never wanted to take a financial risk and launch it myself. And so So I shopped around. I literally talked to probably every issuer, or at least like 70% of them. I talked to all of these issuers. Everybody said no. Like literally no one wanted it. So, and then there's kind of like this mid-size.
Did they say why no?
Usually not, but
Yeah.
it's just, I'm sure it's just because it's kind of like a very niche idea and
Yeah.
everybody, it's untested and nobody has ever heard of a freedom weighted emerging markets index before. And it just wasn't done. So, and then this mid-sized firm kind of agreed to do it, but they wanted to acquire me in the process. And they made me this kind of not a great deal, but I agreed to it anyway, because I was like, well, I want the fund to exist. I think this is the best thing for the fund. So I agreed to the deal. And so right now we're talking about future proof, but back then the big conference was Inside ETFs.
Mhm.
So I went to Inside ETFs. This is like probably my second year there, and second or third year. And I always had, leave myself room at the end of Inside ETFs to just like hang out at the beach, because like in Miami, it's very pretty. And I have, usually a few hours after the conference before I go to the airport. And so I was doing this few hours situation, and I had lunch with Rob Arnott, who had by then agreed to be a seed investor. And I told him, hey, this firm that agreed to do this, and he's had some history with this firm too. So he knows them quite well. And I was like, they haven't been in contact for like a month, like after I agreed to do this deal. And he was like, that's a long time. He was like, it's probably something's not right there. And so, and then I remember seeing Reggie Brown after Rob left, and he was out eating lunch like on the beach, and he was like, you gotta do it. You gotta make the money. You got a lot of friends here. You gotta, make it happen, make the money. Reggie Brown.
It was really moving talking to Perth about her experience of putting a deal together to get her fund off the ground,
Mhm.
And then I've referenced this earlier, and then just out of the blue, the answer goes from yes to no. Rug is just pulled directly out from under her.
Yes.
Somebody pulled the chair when she was sitting down, right? And it hurts when you hit the ground like that.
Yeah.
If anybody's ever done that to you. Starting a fund is incredibly hard anyway. You know that from your work with Alpha Architect. I mean, I know it from my buddy Ryan Kruger and now from Perth. That's no easy thing to do. But again, so collaborative, so willing to listen to others. She talked about mentorship and insight from investors and other encouraging voices. She was smart enough, whether it's intentional or not, doesn't matter. She was smart enough to build a support system
Yes.
so she could get through that point in time. And again, she went from her very lowest low to, oh, wow, this is going to happen. Like literally hours.
Yeah. After years of slugging it out.
That could be pretty isolating. But she wasn't isolated because she had this group.
That's right.
Another super powerful concept and thing.
So yeah, so I, Mr. ETF, and then before that it was Godfather Smart Beta, right? Rob Arnott. So after meeting with these two people, just in the normal course of after conference eating, I went, for my beach walk. And so I'm on the beach. I open up my emails. I'm walking around, and I get this email from the CEO of this firm that I made this terrible deal with and agreed to, backing out of the deal. And I was like so devastated. And I was like crying on the beach, and I went inside to the bathroom to like fix myself. And then I was like sitting at the bar facing the beach, still crying, like crying on the plane home, crying on the way. I was like so devastated. But by this time, even though that was really sad, like by this time I had known that, hey, this idea is much bigger than me. It's going to happen. Me being devastated about that deal had nothing to do with like me doubting the thing was still going to happen. So that was never an issue, but it was just, I really wanted to work with this firm. And it was like, it's just really disappointing. And so the next day, my friend who works at this firm called and was like, hey, this is what happened, and so on and so forth. It's not anybody's fault, but, they had just acquired another firm and just were too distracted with all of that stuff. So that fell through. And that was like my last, it was like, there were no other options. And so that was January, close to February of 2018. And so March of that same year, so a month later, I went to Democratize Quant, which is Wes's conference. And, I was there. This firm was there. Wes was there, obviously. And, Annie Duke was there that year, I remember. So so after the conference, or actually maybe it wasn't Annie Duke that year. It was Barry Ritholtz that year and then Annie Duke the following year. But after that conference, I was in the garage basement. This has been ETF Architect or Alpha Architect was still in the basement. Me, 7 quants, like 7 PhDs, or I don't know, 7, but a lot of PhDs. And I was like, Wes, do you want to partner on this? We can like go halvesies or whatever. And like, he was like, no, like, he was like, you need to do this on your own. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like this guy I'm like, you people have wives. Like you have no idea what I deal with. Like how am I going to do this on my own? You're like 7 PhDs. So I was like really, really mad after that at Wes. And I was like staying with my friend in Philly, spent the rest of that night literally cussing him out, eating all my friend's ice cream to my friend. And then, sending him like 2 a.m, sending him papers because he's like, there's not enough academic studies on this. I'm like sending him academic studies. Like, and so, but then, Wes, the way he is he says something, he means it. So he's like, I'm going to teach you how to do this on your own. So the next 6 months, he spends teaching me how to do this on my own. Like we negotiate contracts together, like all the details. And then Thanksgiving, I'm ready to do this on my own, thanks to Wes, right? The U.S. Bank is drafting my exemptive relief. So back then, you had to get something called the exemptive relief to launch an ETF. And it's just this like legal document that has to be drafted. So by the time you draft that, you basically like, it's kind of like you have to go forward from that point. You can't, you can't back out. So, I mean, you can, but you shouldn't. You have to pay a lot of money. So we were drafting my exemptive relief. It was Thanksgiving break, I believe. And I was on the phone with Wes and he was like, great idea. Brilliant idea. Like never heard of before. You should do this with us. I'm like, like it just had to be his idea.
Again, just throughout our conversation, she emphasized community, the importance of who you surround yourself with. I mean, it's crucial for anyone to do that if they want to move forward and grow and improve themselves, to be cognizant and careful of the circle that you build around yourself. And again, we talked about that with Dave, and that was one of his really big points in our conversation. Because again, Dave talked about this in navigating your career and exploring what's out there, especially as you come out of college and when you're in complex environments, if you're getting married, having kids, like all of that, you just, even after you know what you want to do, you still have to be so careful of the community and the company that you keep. And she was really aware of that for herself and has been along the way. And of course,
maybe she and Dave were connected somehow because she maintained a good circle too.
Yeah, exactly.
She has.
Yeah. But I can't move forward in this conversation without respecting and calling out the fact that some of the success, and she even points and tips her hat to it. Some of the success that she has earned and built and had and received is because of the community and the people that are in her circle. So yeah, just there's a really big conversation point that came out with her that she talked about over and over again.
When I was 13, ETFs didn't exist.
Right.
So there's no way I could have picked my job, like, with my career path. So I told him, just don't worry about what you pick. You can always change it later. So it doesn't matter. So basically, I don't think I could have predicted it, but I mean, I have a finance degree. I just did whatever came most naturally. I kind of wish I did economics instead though, because that's so interesting now. And, our chief economic advisors are very helpful to us in that way. And I grew up in China. I came to the US at 9 years old and went back and forth and went to Hong Kong to live after college, where I realized that freedom made a huge difference in my life and also in these markets, between China market versus Hong Kong market versus US market, there's a massive difference, and it's very palpable for someone who is there. And so my, I guess, personal interactions, my personal experiences in these various very free versus a very unfree country kind of was the seed of this. And so when I came back and I worked at Fidelity, it just kind of eventually I saw the, you know, the rise of indexing and ETFs, how beneficial the ETF structure was for investors. And you know, it just came to this. I didn't plan to use my finance degree, but when I went to Hong Kong, all of my friends were in finance. And then I got more interested in it. And I was like, oh crap, I didn't learn anything in school, you know? So and then, you know, ended up getting the job, you know, from the guy across from my booth who was at the hookah booth. And, you know, he was like, hey, and I was like, hey, what do you do? And he's like, I work at Fidelity. I'm like, hey, I would love to work at Fidelity. And he recruited me into Fidelity. And so that's literally how it happened. You know, I can't take credit for, you know, you cannot predict your life path or really take credit for what you get to do. You know, I get to do this as a privilege. I feel very grateful for every contribution that has been made to this. And I would say a lot of them are not mine, right? So the amount of people that contributed to this and the ways that they contributed, like every little one I remember. Recently, I went to the 10-year anniversary of Women in ETFs and ran into Laura Morrison, who I met at the initial ETF bootcamp conference, and who at the initial bootcamp conference gave me and my friend a tour of the New York Stock Exchange, like had us come in for a closing bell. Because I called her spontaneously from downstairs at Broad and Wall. I remember calling her, hey, we met last night. And she had told me, here's my card, call me whenever you're in the area. If you go sightseeing or something. And I was like, hey, we're here. And she was like, are you downstairs? Like, 6 times. And my friend was like, you know, don't bother her. And I was like, yes. And she was like, okay, come in. And she like literally gave us a tour of the New York Stock Exchange. And even through it, like I knew, but that's not to credit me. That's because I've already experienced how this idea is bigger than me. Because by then I had met Rob. He had committed money to it. You know, meeting Rob was another big thing, you know, that I couldn't have orchestrated. I tried, but failed. And then it was orchestrated for me, you know, so yeah, I honestly, I'm so thankful to just be able to get to do this. And Jess, you know, you've been a part of this work, you know you have, and you've put people in the strategy and, you know, told people about it. So the growth is partly due to you as well. So a lot of people have been a part of this and, you know, you've been a big part of it. So thank you.
So, you know, yes to all of the above. Perth, we so appreciate you sharing your journey. I did not know, you've known Perth for a long time. I did not, other than, you know, listening to some podcasts that she's been on and we have a Twitter thing going on. I tend to connect well with other snarky people. Surprise, surprise. She really is who she portrays herself to be. And that's kind of rare. I mean, she's
refreshing,
really genuine, but also a pioneer, you know, as a woman in this business. Mm-hmm. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
All right, Mark, shall we get into it?
No, let's just quit here. Yeah, sure, let's go.
That was enough, right? So good. Yeah. I honestly, the back half of today's conversation is probably going to be pretty short, but I did want to use this as an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about emerging markets, since that is the asset class that her fund and her ideas fall into. And you know, of course, we're not going to give any investment recommendations here, but I think emerging markets and maybe asset class models, portfolios, some of these conversation points and conversation pieces revolve around words that just to a normal person don't make sense. And I know that for myself, I had to do a lot of work over the last 8 years to catch up on what these words mean and why they matter. So I want to talk about emerging markets, but I don't want to just jump straight into that. I want to do some definitions first and really back up and back ourselves into the ability to have a quick conversation about emerging markets. So Mark, first tell me what financial advisors mean when they say this is the model your money is being put into or you're going into, because I hear that a lot.
Well, so the first thing I'm going to do is give some advice to advisors and to prospective and to clients too.
Yeah.
Don't use the word model.
Yeah, right. But it still gets thrown around.
It does get thrown around. And I'm not saying it doesn't mean anything. I'm saying to the average human, it has no meaning. What are they thinking about? Some Tinker toys you stick together?
Right.
You know, the plastic ship that I glued together and hopefully you didn't sniff the glue. But
The
by
toilets
the way,
that Derek Kagan was drawing back in his earlier career.
Derek Kagan was drawing, yes. Forgot about that one. But that's not a bad analogy, right? An investment model is nothing other than a set of investment pieces that are assembled together intentionally for reasons, usually involving a bunch of math around the historical behavior of those particular investments and how they are likely to fit together and work together in the future.
Mm-hmm.
That's effectively what a model is.
Mm-hmm.
And there are tons of different models. And believe me, there's no right or wrong. It's why I said very early on in this conversation that I think just about any of these models will work if you understand its likely behaviors and you understand like your own ability to tolerate volatility and your own capacity to deal with swings in value. Mm-hmm. But a model is a set of pieces that you put together with the intention of making the whole work better than the parts.
Yeah. And I compare this to if you were to go into a therapy session with a mental...
Are you suggesting that I need therapy?
I am not suggesting. I'm not saying you don't. I'm just not saying that you do. But if you were to go into that session and you were to start telling your therapist what you're dealing with and how you're struggling, and your therapist were to come back with, well, here's the DSM criteria that you need to have in order for me to give you this diagnosis. And here's the model that we're going to use that best applies to this situation to help you work through this. Like, you would fire that therapist, I hope. Mm-hmm. Because that is information that the therapist needs to know for sure, but it's not going to help you get better and to help you move along this path toward the mental health that you are looking for. And so I think about this in the same way that, when somebody tells you, here's the model, here's how it works, here's the pieces of it, here's what we're going to do, blah, blah, blah. You may or may not be interested in that information, but none of that information, very little of that information is going to be helpful for you to be successful with the financial outcomes that you're looking for.
And realistically, this is my opinion, it's not financial advice. A really good advisor builds a model that fits your behaviors.
Absolutely. That was the other thing. Yeah.
There's not just this one, hey, this is our 60-40 model and you've got the risk tolerance for a 60-40 investor and bang. Yeah. Look, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'm not saying it won't work. It certainly can and has worked for many people. But a really good advisor is listening to you and thinking, what are the pieces? And this is basically what Shana was focused on. What are the pieces that if we put them together make sense for you, you'll stick with? Because no plan is useful if it's not executed upon. Yeah. It becomes a very expensive paperweight.
Right.
Because most good advisors, in my opinion, not saying I don't want to get into the fee wars, but most good advisors charge a fee for their planning work. And so you've then paid that fee and you don't execute that.
Yeah.
That's an expensive paperweight. And by the way, I have a little model on my desk. It's because I've been interested in the intersection of autism, ADHD, and giftedness. And anybody who knows me would know why. But, here's a decent model of how those things fit together or could fit together. Now, would that apply to me or you or anybody else listening to this conversation? Don't know. That's why you have somebody that this is what they do to look at it. Here are the pieces of this model that make sense for you, and we will build you a model that works for your behavior.
That's right.
Whether it's financial or mental health, doesn't matter. Yep. Same thing.
Yeah. So second term that I wanted to cover that I casually brushed over earlier was asset class. What is an asset class?
Another useless term. It's actually very useful to those of us who are professionals who are building models, but most clients, I would guess, would roll their eyes at that. That is nothing other than a way to literally classify the same way you would, it's like phylum, right? If you're into biology. So, for example, an example is U.S. large cap. Well, that's a nice little term. What the hell does that mean? Nothing to any client, but it is an asset class, and it's bundling together. And I forget the valuation metric for large cap. It's at this point probably 20 billion or something, but it's bundling together like size investments. And in this case, they're in the United States. They're large capitalization stocks, Intel.
Which means they're worth a certain amount. Yeah.
They're in the marketplace.
In the marketplace, they're worth a certain billions of dollars, or trillion. Yeah.
And to use something that you might have heard, the S&P 500, for example, is a collection of U.S. large cap stocks. Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's a way to classify various types of investments. And it makes a lot of sense if you're an investment professional or if you're a client, because these classes of assets tend to have similar behaviors
within themselves.
Within that
class, yes.
Like small cap stocks tend to be a lot more volatile in valuation than large cap stocks.
Yep.
Tend to be.
And so this is a way to bundle things together so that when you're building an overall model, you can attempt to achieve a certain amount of risk or attempt to achieve a financial outcome for your client by respecting maybe the expected behavior of that asset class and why that might be something that you decide to put in a portfolio or a model for your client. As I was kind of thinking about this conversation, the way that I like to pull away from money and talk about other things that are adjacent or that have kind of an analogy, just to help simplify the conversation a bit. And for this one, I was thinking like maybe if a model is the body, like the human body, as an analogy to your investment portfolio, like it's everything you use to construct and build and make up the investment approach. If that's the case, then asset classes are the systems. So digestive system, the skeletal system, the nervous system, the circulatory system, they all have different functions within the human body, and they act very differently and they respond very differently to stimulus. And emerging markets in this analogy is one of those systems. And it has a specific function and a specific purpose. And to your point, what you were talking about earlier, it has certain behaviors and certain, expectations or things that we can potentially anticipate about it based on past behaviors. So tell us a little bit about emerging markets specifically and why not someone would include it in a model, not as an advice perspective, but just as a information perspective.
Well, and just to be clear, what Perth has done with the Freedom Index is build a model to work to apply to the emerging markets as a way to sort out all the potential investment opportunities in emerging markets. Now, emerging markets in terms of kind of portfolio analysis and behaviors tend to be very, very volatile, right? You're talking about generally smaller countries, smaller companies, emerging technologies that are not maybe have been well proven.
And by volatile, we mean you can see large upswings daily, even
large upswings and large downswings in pricing.
Yes,
sometimes daily.
You see a big negative, for a long time.
You could see a very big negative. There was a market. Think of it was maybe Japan that was down 12% in one day last month or the month before. I don't. You can see that we have an investment team. They worry about those things. I worry about client planning. But I just remember, I think we were talking to Bob Seawright about this. How hard would it have been to trade that market? It was like down 9% in a day, and the next 2 days it was up 12%. So the point is, and Japan is no longer an emerging market. But if you think about, a lot of countries in the East, Thailand, Vietnam, places like these are emerging markets. Israel wasn't probably might still be an emerging. I don't know how it's classified exactly, but probably not anymore. But Israel, for example, has a lot of very innovative technology coming out of there. The swings in value in these companies can be huge, because if something comes out of an emerging market, it's like, oh, that's super cool. We've never seen that before. It's going to be amazing. And then maybe they don't manage their cash flow well, or let's look at China, where there's no optics on their financials, right? They don't have generally accepted accounting principles, and I don't think they want them, but I'm not a China expert. How do you gauge cash flow from an investment coming out of China? When you have emerging markets like that, they don't have the established structure that we have in the United States. They don't have the accounting principles. They don't have the auditors.
Good ideas.
They don't have.
They have
great ideas and very entrepreneurial people, but they don't have the infrastructure. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have spectacular failures and spectacular successes in the U.S. We certainly do. But think about that in a country where it's more opaque. That's an emerging market. It's not bad or good.
It just is.
It just is. And it's a way to classify a set of behaviors and economics. And what Perth has done is actually really fascinating.
She's taken something that's very opaque, and she's created a lot of transparency around this idea of freedom, which is tied to economic behavior, market behavior. This idea and this concept of market freedom and investor freedom. And so it's what she has done for the emerging market space is truly innovative and helpful for people who are interested in including this asset class within their model. So I feel like we. I was just gonna say, I feel like we should, at the end of this episode, flash the more you know rainbow across the screen, right?
There you go.
Hopefully.
There you go. Better yet, let's put up an asset allocation model and really blow everybody and put everybody to sleep. But anyway, let's understand. I mean, you might listen to this and say, I don't want any part of emerging markets. Yeah. And okay, you could make that decision as an investment professional, and I wouldn't agree with you. I mean, I don't like volatility any more than anybody else. But what you do with highly volatile investment categories, asset classes, whatever you want to call them, emerging markets, right, is the way you manage risk is you make it a smaller slice of your portfolio. We have emerging markets in most of our client portfolios. And I certainly have them in mind, but a couple of percent. And even then, within that couple of percent allocation, it's spread across multiple emerging markets. You're just trying to both spread the risk and give yourself more opportunity to find whether there's stellar winners.
Yeah, as an investor, I think you have two choices here. The one is that I don't understand this as much as I feel like I need to in order to make good decisions on my behalf. And so therefore I hire somebody and I put my faith and my trust in them. And then the other option is to go down this huge rabbit hole of education. Not that it's going to necessarily help you achieve outsized returns in a space by knowing all that you can know about emerging markets, but it can help you maybe understand better who you are as an investor, understand your risk profile better, understand better how you can construct a model for yourself. And again, back to analogies, I kind of relate that back to when someone wants to get stronger. They can hire a trainer and that trainer can develop the program for them, and they can just show up at the gym and trust that by doing the thing that the trainer is asking them to do, they are going to stay safe and they are going to get stronger and they are going to get fitter and they're going to achieve their health goals. The other option is I can do a deep dive on the internet of how to put together this weightlifting program for myself. And I feel qualified to keep myself safe, to make good choices with my program so that I'm going to get stronger. You are going to put your clients in a slice of emerging markets in most cases because you feel confident in the outcomes of that model for your client. And that is okay for someone to say, I don't understand, but I trust Mark. In the same way that it would be
foolish decision, but we don't have to go there.
In the same way that it would be okay for them to say, I want to figure this out on my own.
I mean, this is self-promotion for us, but that's where we add value to our clients. For those clients who don't want to do that deep dive and don't want to self-direct and want to go do the things that they're interested in doing, and that's why you hire a professional in any field.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be your own doctor too if you don't mind, doing certain things. I mean, look, I've had 3 knee surgeries. I know a lot about how the knee works. I've paid attention to what's been recommended to me and what's been done. And you could argue that I could do my own knee repair. I think any doctor who I thank you for that look, any doctor, for those of you who are just listening, I got quite a look from a actual, a physical fitness professional who probably knows a lot more about the body than I do. Any doctor that I said that to would look me in the eye and say, you're absolutely nuts.
Right.
Now, we don't tell clients they're nuts, but we do hear things from clients that are like, you are not going to be able to pull that off. And we've seen that to be true more often than not. So a big part of what we're trying to do here is educate, right? So that you can be empowered to make better financial decisions. That better financial decision might be to hire somebody like me or Jess or somebody else. It might be, I want to get really good at this and I'm going to spend time on it and it's an interest of mine and I'm going to figure it out. Now, I would tell you if you're going to do that, you should buy professional software and some other things, but that's a whole nother conversation. What we're trying to do is make sure you're educated so you can make better decisions. And if we do that, we've added value to the universe. And that is something that Perth is doing on emerging markets. She's making it very transparent how her fund selects equities in those markets and what decisions they make and why. It is very much a modeling exercise, but then it becomes very real world when that model makes decisions and that's published out there and you can invest in that. I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. That's a decision for you and or your advisor if you have one. But this is all an educational thing for us. We hope it benefits you. We thank Perth for sharing her amazing journey. And it's tremendous to see her success. And until next time, folks, this is How Did We Get Here?
A big thanks to our amazing guests who agreed to join us on a journey through their career stories on How Did We Get Here?
If you've enjoyed the laughs, surprises, and unexpected turns, be sure to hit subscribe for more intriguing tales.
Your support means the world to us.
Until the next episode, keep asking, keep exploring, and keep wondering,
how did we get here?
This podcast is not intended as and may not be considered to be investment advice and does not constitute a recommendation of any investment strategy or product for a particular investor. The information presented on this program is believed to be factual and up to date, but we do not guarantee its accuracy and it should not be regarded as a complete analysis of the subjects discussed. Discussions should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy or sell the investments mentioned. Investors should consult a financial professional before making any investment decisions. The opinions are those of the host and interviewees at the time of the podcast recording and are subject to change. These comments should not be construed as recommendations, but as an illustration of broader themes. Forward-looking statements are not guarantees of future results. They involve risks, uncertainties, and assumptions. There can be no assurance that actual results will not differ materially from expectations. Investments involve varying degrees of risks, and there can be no assurance that any specific investment or strategy will be suitable or profitable for our client's portfolio. All investment strategies can result in profit or loss. Jess Boss is an investment advisor representative of Wealth Tech Partners, LLC, DBA, Lake Avenue Financial, which is a registered investment advisor and only conducts business in jurisdictions where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Mark Newfield is an investment advisor representative of Journey Strategic Wealth, which is a registered investment advisor and only conducts business in jurisdictions where it is properly registered or is excluded or exempted from registration requirements. Registration as an investment advisor is not an endorsement of the firm by securities regulators and does not mean the advisor has achieved a specific level of skill or ability. The firm is not engaged in the practice of law or accounting. You should always consult an attorney or tax professional regarding your specific legal or tax situation.